All right, Luke, you have quite a few names highlighted on here. I don't necessarily know many of them. I know a few of them, but you told me that you have something more interesting in mind. And like looking at these things, I'm looking at Great Eagle Gold here. It's a CSE stock. That's already kind of sort of, as we've discussed, maybe a yellow flag making me think about it. But it's up 200% this week. They had some news, but they had absolutely no volume, no price movement, nothing for I mean, as far as back as I can go on the chart, which is like last year in the spring, summer actually. And then all of a sudden there's a pop. There's almost 100,000 shares changing hands, $24,000 of volume. Doesn't sound like a lot, but it's actually a lot for this very small company. And the stock is up 200%. What so what? I mean, what I can see it and I can think with hindsight, oh, it would have been great if I'd bought, but I didn't. And so is there, I mean, is there even a chance for someone like me to see this, catch it, and then maybe enjoy some of the upside, if not most of it?
Yeah, exactly. That's the complete purpose of this week, I think. I decided to highlight many news releases, not to discuss each of them in detail and why or why not it may be good news, but more the process around it. Like, is it possible to do something with this type of news and how? And in the case of Great Eagle, I took a chart with me, a very simple chart, just an orange line, which shows with a bit of volume in it. So you can see that there was very little volume last year, up to a couple of weeks ago. And I think in the Canadian markets, also in the Australian markets, but in the Canadian markets, companies get recycled or created. They have very low outstanding shares, and there are only a few owners. When they list a new company, they probably have 200 shareholders, 250, but then they often make sure that 200 people get a very tiny position and the main holders will have most of it. And when they do a rollback and they create a new company by reverse takeover, an existing shell, then they can clean it up as far as they want. So there may only be very little shareholders left. So that's why you see almost like a straight line of no volume. And often the volume increases a little bit towards the deal because these deals are sort of assembled. They are produced. It is a company, they get a project into it, then they get some people into it, they get positioned, they found apparently a project probably earlier, probably already before the management came in. So they acquire the project from someone and they can start promoting it. So it's a little bit of a process to start a new company. And I'm explaining it almost in a way as if it's controversial, and it could be, but it doesn't have to be. If you just have a private company and you have done enough work that you think it's time to bring it to the venture, then you do it this way or similar ways. So it's not necessarily obscure, but it means that often at some point a project with nothing in it has something in it and trading starts happening. And what you could do, which is it's a bit difficult, is to screen these shells, these empty companies, for certain events. For example, a private placement with some notes in it that insiders take a certain percentage, or a property acquisition which raises eyebrows. So sometimes there are signs, but it's very difficult if you are not close to insiders or insider yourself, or you don't hear any rumors to really know what's going to happen. But I play this game a little bit by buying some stock in companies where I see owners or directors that are well known, but these shells often are shielded by having some names in it that nobody knows, and only the people with the bigger name come in the moment the project is acquired. So in this case, Great Eagle is sort of a newly established company from the shell called Misa 2, and now it's a new company, and suddenly there's trading. So this price is really, you could call it an artificial price, and the real price is only set when free trading dates, when financings are done and free trading dates are over, and that's when you really see a price settle somewhere. But if you would have spotted this company a couple of months ago, you could perhaps have bought $10,000 if you wanted to take the gamble, and that $10,000 is now worth $30,000. But there was no volume in the market to buy $50,000 or $100,000 of this type of stock. because it was just a shell. So that's the story behind Great Eagle. Without me knowing anything about Great Eagle, it's pretty obvious that this is a created company, as most companies get created at some point through a shell or through a new listing.
How do you know when a project that has been added to a shell like this even makes sense? I mean, this is now a $12 million market cap company. I know companies with real deposits and even multiple discoveries on it that are trading for less right now in this market. So how do you know whether this is too much or whether you have more upside to go to? I think that this might, by the way, be a good point to move forward to Founders Metals too, because they were in a comparable position not too long ago. So
yeah, completely. I think it's very important if you invest in the public shares. If at some point these companies come out with their story, the new placement, and they often go to a network of people that get the opportunity to buy this stock. Like Founders, I think, started financing end of last year. I met them at a conference in Toronto earlier this year, when the financing was not closed yet, and I asked them. They were there for a different company because it was a group running a couple of companies, and I asked them about Founders, and they said, "Well, if you want to participate and you can be quick, you can do the subscription agreement and join this financing," which I didn't. It was a 20 cents financing, and they told me at the time, "Hey, this is a project that was drilled in the past. Here are the drill results," and they looked amazing, like 10 grams over 80 meters. Then why did the previous company not continue? Often because it was small, high grade but small, and they didn't find enough to make it worthwhile. And then a new company comes and they see potential and they buy it again. And then Founders, I think, started a little bit like that with a high grade property in Suriname. And I asked them, like, are you going to drill these? Are you going to twin these holes? And they didn't say twin, but they kind of confirmed that, of course, they will start where previously they hit gold. So it makes sense to start close to the previous holes, which means that you start with good news releases. So I wasn't surprised to see Founders come out with good news a couple of weeks ago. And the stock didn't really react much to it. Probably because the financing became free trading and there was enough supply. There was $3 million of buying in the financing. That money that was in the money. So investors took the opportunity to sell their stock at 30 cents and keep the warrant. And that's why the stock didn't really move much. And now they came out with an even better result, 15 meter at 30 grams. And the complete point, I think, is of today's meeting, at least what I want to get across is, at this point, I have no idea if what Founders drilled is a good result or an expected result. And I think you cannot trade Founders or buy Founders without knowing if they just twinned a previous hole or if this hole is really meaningful. Is this a step out? Is this a new understanding of a system? So you need to read the news release properly, and you need to go back to the previous results to see, what does this really mean? And then probably you have to call the company and ask them for context. And only then I think you can trade Founders or buy Founders. And so my point is, even with a headline like this, 15 meters at 30 grams, which is an amazing headline, there's no guarantee it's meaningful. Because they did have holes like this in the past. And frankly speaking, I really don't know. I didn't do the work in the past weeks to determine if this is meaningful. But the market tells us it is, because it went up 80% on pretty substantial volume. So my point is not to explain whether Founders is good or bad. It's really the process of analyzing the news, understanding where it is, understanding the financing that became free trading, and that has a big effect on the stock price. And in this case, it seems to work out so far.
Yeah, it's just you had this this other chart just showing the volume on it. You basically need to understand if the company, or what I'm getting from you here is, you basically need to understand whether the company is going to be able to keep coming up with news that will be creating volume events, so that the stock can basically carry the selling that comes through on the free trading date.
Yeah, 100%. I think a hole like this, 15 meters at 30 grams, if this would be a greenfield discovery, and it confirms the concept that the company has been explaining to investors for many years or many months, and they finally hit this in a greenfield project, a hole like this is amazing and the stock will continue to go because it could be that next big discovery. I simply don't know about founders if this hole is changing the complete game. I really don't know. But indeed, if I made this chart of the financing, there were 80. I have to back up a little bit. I'm not sure if there were 80. The number I have to check again. But there were a pretty substantial number of investors in the founders financing. Yeah, 83 places. So 83 people owning 20-cent stock with a half warrant at 30 cents. They put in $3 million into the company, and that $3 million is now worth more than $9 or $10 million, not even considering the warrant. And before this good news, or before this news, assuming it's good, there was about $40,000 in volume every day. And suddenly there is $9 million, $10 million of free trading stock with people who own a warrant. So that $9 or $10 million has a reason to sell, unless they really believe in the project and they will keep it. So I'm not suggesting that there will be $9 million of selling, but there's a potential for $9 million of selling. And that's why the $40,000 is tiny in comparison. But as long as the company can really increase the value of the project, and that's why this news release is so important, if this is really increasing the value of the project so dramatically, the company could go much higher. But if this is 10 meters away from the previous drill hole, and it just confirms that the system is 10 meters bigger, well, then there is a lot of risk, and the next hole is going to be crucial to see if it can sustain this market cap and the share price. More importantly, the share price. So that's the complete game, I think. Understanding, who owns this stock, what's the risk of this thing coming back down again? Is this a real discovery or not? And how good will the next hole have to be to keep this value or to increase the value? And that's the difficulty of discovery investing or exploration investing, because in most cases you need the next hole to be better, at least similar or better than the previous one, to keep the story alive. Because it's all based on supply and demand of stock, and the company is not creating any money; it's just creating news flow. So news flow versus stock. And that's the complete game, I think, to understand. And that's why I didn't buy founders, because I didn't evaluate it properly enough to know if this 30 meters or this 15 meters of 30 grams is a game changer or not.
It's interesting how you look at this as a real speculator, I guess, because you're mostly thinking about, as you should, in these things that are speculations. You're not thinking about value. It's also very hard to stick a value to something like that. You're thinking about what kind of a price moving event will this create? And if there's a bunch of shares coming free trading that are not making money or making a little bit of money, but already have the free upside through the free warrants that they got, well, that's going to create, downward pressure on a lot of volume. Can this stock really mop it up? They could, if they create a lot of excitement, and so they create also upside pressure with a bunch of volume of new people wanting to come in because they've de-risked the project or moved it to a further. You look at this very differently, I guess, than a lot of people do. So I do appreciate that. This is also what the last chart is, I suppose, that you have here with you.
You mean the one with the orange dollars?
Yes.
Yeah. So this is, of course, I'm a little bit. I sound maybe a little bit skeptical, but that's, I think, the game often is, and that creates a lot of wealth, but also a lot of bad stocks, is acquiring a new project that for some reason seems exciting, getting the insiders seeded, which makes sense. Sometimes it feels like, oh, why do they get 5-cent stocks and I have to pay 15 cents or 20 cents or 25 cents? That often feels unfair. But depending on how much work the founders did or just finding this property, I think it's okay that they get cheap stock. It depends how cheap it is. So you get that acquisition, you get the people seeded. In most cases, you get some good initial results because there was a reason to buy the property, and they have to release that news. And I think companies do a little bit of news planning. So even though in the announcement they will explain what they bought and why, in most cases, in the months after, they will come up with some good surface samples, and people think, oh, well, this looks interesting, and then they start promoting it a bit. More good news. So let's do a financing 3 or 4 times higher than the initial price that the founders paid. and then there's often more good news, and there's a bigger financing. And this is a little bit what happened with Rome Resources. Rome is another company that went up this week, and even though I sound very skeptical, this is probably the way to do it, to create a new company. But as an investor, you constantly have to weigh, like, is this good news really good news, or is it just slowly building a nice story, and then doing a bigger financing even in anticipation of a bigger drill program, and then the results come out of the drill program, and that will often tell the story for the time being, good or bad. And the headline will often read positive news from XYZ, from this showing and that drilling, and that doesn't mean a lot, because they will never say negative news from the drill program. It will always be positive, even if they didn't find much. So the headline is often a bit tricky. You have to read the news and understand what was expected by the market, or at least the investors in this stock, versus what did they just provide. And if it's amazing, the company will very quickly move forward with a new drill program and a new financing, and they can keep the thing going. If the news is disappointing, so disappointing that the company even scratches their head, like, this hole really had to hit, because now with these results, it's no longer confirming our thesis, then often you get a period of very quiet news flow. And that's when the stock often starts lagging, and some people sell early, and some people only find out a couple of months later, like, oh, this story seems to be over, and I'm back, below my cost average. So this is often what happens. You see a stock go up, and at some point disappointment hits, and the stock goes down. And in very few successful cases, the company can really keep on building that value, like Founders is doing right now, and it becomes an amazing story, and everybody will like it, and it's a book will be written about it 5 years after, or 10 years after. So I think this is important to know, that you always have this news flow that is often pre-planned in a way, because you need to keep that news flow coming to keep people excited.
Yeah, I don't think I have any other things to add. And so I think that's a good note to end it on, because it's very good takeaways.
Yeah, so just to summarize, I highlighted a lot of news releases this week of things that I find interesting. I decided not to go into those news releases, but rather talk about, one company that's just getting started, Great Eagle, and one company that is started and is going well, Founders Metals. You really have to make a decision to buy or to sell on news. You need to know the expectation and not just the headline and the first paragraph. Aldoro Resources this week went down because they did an XRF earlier, which suggested good news. Came with essays, they were disappointing.
Right.
Which means
I'm sorry for interrupting. That's something I noticed that in the list. But you can, before you move on, do talk to me about, because I do want to talk to me about the XRF results. It's very funny. I don't even know why companies make news releases. I don't understand it. It makes absolutely no sense to me.
Yeah, it makes sense to me, to be honest, because companies find themselves in difficult positions, especially in Australia. In Canada, companies have a little bit more freedom, I think. Well, they have to release news when it's material news, for sure. But in Australia, the rules are even stricter. And when a company drills something that looks visually, significant, and potentially changing the company's valuation, they have to bring that news as soon as possible, as reasonably possible. And if the company will also get an immediate email from the exchange if the stock starts trading without news, and they will ask, hey, what happened? And explain this to the market, please. What is happening over here? So a company can either explain the visuals, or they can also add any measurements that they may have, for example, the XRF. And I think it's tricky for sure. Maybe explaining the visuals and showing, providing pictures as detailed as possible with descriptions of what the geologists see in the core is the safest way to go. But I think in Australia, companies will have to release something if it's visually interesting. Otherwise, they are not releasing material results. And since essays can take 6, 8, 9 weeks, they cannot leave that in the open, because some people will find out. You have people in the essay lab, you have geologists, you have CEOs, perhaps family members. I mean, I think it's very difficult to control good news, and that's why in Australia they force the companies to release it as soon as possible.
Yeah, I'm kind of split on it because so I understand that part, but it also looks a little bit sleazy to me when you know that there are going to be people out there reading that and thinking, oh, this is a new discovery. Some companies announce a new discovery on XRF results. And that, I mean, that also makes no sense to me in terms of the valuation of the company. I understand that they have to, um, I mean, the technicality, as you mentioned, following the exchange's rules, but it's, I don't know, it sounds sleazy to me when you know that some people are just gonna assume that these are assays. There's a lot of people participating in the sector that don't necessarily know or understand the difference between an XRF um, quote unquote discovery and a real, drill discovery.
Yeah, I think indeed XRF is very tricky. Visuals can also be tricky. Last year there was a company with very nice core, uh, core that was compared to Voices Bay, and they were kind of suggesting in the news release this could be that next Voices Bay discovery, and the stock went from 10 cents to $1 in a matter of days or maybe weeks. Um, Diamond fields. I mean, I looked at a lot of discoveries in the 90s, and you see that the company often went up 3-4x before the actual essays came out. So there is interest. If a company comes out with Voices Bay said potentially significant occurrence of base metal mineralization containing nickel, copper, cobalt, drill holes from drill core from 4 holes en route to lab. They even Voices Bay in the 90s already described what they found, and the stock went up from I think about $1 to uh, close to $3 when the news actually came out. So a three bagger. And considering that Australia companies are really forced to bring out any significant news, you have to also do something with the visuals. And the company needs to decide, like, do we also do XRF, or do we just do pictures with logging descriptions of core? And I think the last option is better. Aston Bay did something similar as well with American West recently, and I liked it when they had the tables and literally describing from this meterage to this meterage, we found this in the core. And then at least as an investor, you can really go through those tables and make up your mind based on their knowledge, because their knowledge is mostly your knowledge because they released it. So indeed, XRF is tricky. Visuals and descriptions are probably needed if you have long essay times.